Hey guys, Matt here. So this talk actually was inspired by just some conversation we had going in the Facebook group, which if you're not a member, please do apply. Just look for Cheltenham and UK Philosophers on Facebook and you can apply, and just make sure you answer the membership questions, because to avoid being spammed with sort of fake accounts and non-genuine applicants, we only allow those who've answered the membership question. So it's just a simple question, why do you want to join? But anyway, moving on to the subject of the talk. So this was inspired by one of many sort of ongoing sort of conversations we're having in the group, and it came. I think somebody posted something about some political position on something. I don't need to go into the detail of what it was, and that's right. No, it was me. I posted something actually. So I posted this meme. It said something like, I think the wording was, "I don't want to go back to the way things were. I want to go forward to how things should be." Right, and there was this beautiful sort of picture of it, like a little forest tunnel, a tree tunnel kind of thing, and at the end were rainbows and unicorns and all this sort of stuff. Right? So I thought that was a really positive message for a Sunday. But Evelyn came in, as she very often does, because she always provokes thoughts, right? So hence this talk. She said, well, things are as they should be. Things are as they should be, right? And so, it kind of reminded me of maybe a kind of Taoist sort of position, or maybe some sort of branch of Buddhism or something, or could just plainly be her view on things, right? But for me, that raises a fascinating question, because if we say, well, things are as they should be, then we have to say that there's some, well, not necessarily say that there's some purpose for all this suffering, but in some sense it sort of sounds like it's unavoidable. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I've misunderstood, because of course, just because things are as they should be, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't aspire to something better in the future. So I'll have to check with Evelyn on that. But it got me thinking anyway. So this isn't a retort necessarily to Evelyn, but it's just an exploration of some of the ideas that occurred to me after those comments, because she said things are just as they are, and she also commented that people are always trying to sort of change the world, right, to the way that they want it for themselves. Right, that sort of the implication being that that they think their worldview is right, and if the world was according to that, then everyone will be okay, kind of thing. And I hope that it doesn't seem as though I'm sort of pushing something along those lines, because I don't think I am. But I think all I'm really suggesting is that I think that just having these conversations, right, is a useful thing. And I mean, really, the whole purpose behind this, as I've mentioned elsewhere, is to just kind of open the door for people into a very interesting world of science and philosophy and mysticism here and there, right? Because because it helped me, and I've seen it help others. Right? I've seen philosophy save lives. I've seen reflection, meditation, and sort of rethinking people's position in the world and so on as an extremely healthy activity, right? Because you can be easily caught up in the stresses and strains of a particular sort of life narrative, right? And that could be forcing you to do things that you don't particularly want to do. You think about these people working 24/7 for that promotion which they think they need, or for the extra money that they need to do what, upgrade their car or house or something, and so So it's about that question, can we change, right? And it reminds me of this almost repeating conversation that I have with people, where I say something along the lines of, we should aspire to better, and it's tragic that these things are going, wars and suffering and so on, and we're being mismanaged, and by bad actors, right, who don't have our interests at heart. Okay, and I quite often get in response, stop fussing about that. It will never change. Humans are just nasty. We're the violent apes, and we're basically greedy and selfish, and we don't care. We just as long as it's someone else suffering somewhere hundreds of miles away, we're uninterested. And for me, that's always struck me as incredibly cynical, right? And I don't believe it. I just simply do. I mean, I think it's completely unscientific to say that human beings can't change, that there are aspects of our nature that are completely, written in stone, right? Because we've proven that we can change, right? So, just take snapshots of human behaviour and customs and so on over, a period of a few thousand years or something, and so every, say, 5,000 years. And our behaviours and conduct and ideas and thinking would be unrecognisable. Stepping from any of those to any of the others, almost. I mean, perhaps there were longer periods of nomadic living and so on. But look, you get the point that humans can change, right? And our circumstances have changed dramatically. It's very recent that we've been living in these heavily populated metropoli, right? That's a recent thing. It's a recent thing that we're pelting it down motorways at sort of 110 miles an hour. That's a recent thing. Computers are a recent thing. We're undergoing some of the most radical changes in our behaviours and thinking in the last sort of 150 years than ever before. So the evidence is all around us that we can change, right? And the other thing that concerns me with this narrative, this kind of, no, we can't change, we're always going to be run by horrible, sadistic bullies, right? The other thing that annoys me about that is that, well, I mean, it's really as simple as this. The people saying that it will never change are the ones stopping it, right? So, I know dozens of these sorts of people that sort of, they look at the world and say, oh, it's terrible, and, I hate it, and blah, 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 and I wish it would change, right? But then when you get into it and think, well, what should we do? What's the plan? What's wrong exactly? And is it written into the human condition? And then you try and get into the discussion, and they're like, oh no, we'll never change. It's just the way it is, right? And that strikes me as lazy. It strikes me as negative, cynical, and actually extremely destructive, right? Because imagine, Immanuel Kant wrote a book on ethics, right? And he talked about this categorical imperative, right? And it basically it's something along these lines. It's if you can universalize the maxim of your action, if you can coherently universalize the maxim of your action, then that's a morally allowable act, right? Now, and so it's extremely clever because it prohibits lying, for example, right? So if you universalize lying, then lying would lose its meaning because there would never be any truth told, and lying is only in contrast with the truth. So it cannot be coherently universalized. Right? Again, something like murder can't be coherently universalized because there'd be no one left to to enforce the rule anyway, right? So, and so I think that is relevant for some reason, but I can't remember. Yeah, so to continue the point, actually, that I forgot earlier, another argument to support this notion of broad change is, again, a very, very simple argument, and it follows as thus. So an individual can change direction within their own lives, right? So, you can have an individual that converts to Judaism in their 50s, or an individual who leaves a religion or changes direction in terms of career or becomes a meditator, becomes a businessman. So people can completely redesign their own participation in the world, right? So if it can happen at that scale, I'm talking radical, U-turn scenarios here, which can and do happen. My life has taken some dramatic turns in the last sort of 20 or 30 years. I decided to jack in my sort of failed attempt at an insurance career. God, it was so boring. Jacked everything in and went back to university. I went to university when I was 27. Right. I got 3 degrees. Right. After I left school with nothing. Teachers said I'd amount to nothing. One of them said I would probably be a bin man, and I remember retorting, "What's wrong with bin men?" I said they provide an essential service, and I think he clipped me around the ear and sent me out at that point. So, so look, so if an individual can change their direction and point of view, then why can that not happen at larger scales? And, daft question anyway, because it has and does happen at larger scales, right? So, who was it who said that education is a race between, history is a race between education and disaster, right? And I think that slowly but surely, education is winning. It's this new kind of techno-mycelial network that we've built called the internet is disseminating all the world's information across all the world, right? So you could have people in a village in Angola somewhere that have access to quantum physics textbooks and lectures. There are free lectures. You can go online, just do a search for Harvard lectures, right? I found Robert Sapolsky through this means, and I've since watched every single one of his lectures on anthropology, neuroscience, behaviour, his stuff about free will and so on. The guy's an unbelievable. But he's available to everybody, right? That just was not the case 15, 20 years ago, right? So during COVID, I logged on and found hundreds of minds that I would never have been exposed to if it weren't for this technology, right? Because they weren't in the local library, they weren't taught at university, and you just don't know. I didn't know any neuroscientists before the internet, right? Now I have email contact with some of these guys, professional neuroscientists, and it's awesome. There's so much going on in science and philosophy at the moment that, this is what we should be doing. Anyway, so look, I'm trailing off a little bit there. This is about change. So if personal change can happen at a personal level, then why not sort of intrapersonal and then macro-personal, right? So that's a fairly sort of basic argument. It was Nietzsche that suggested that insanity exists in groups as opposed to individuals. So maybe that's some reason that once we get into a group situation, there's this kind of collective identity that sort of takes over, and we're more apt to dogmatic thinking or sort of partisan sort of modes of thinking and so on. So we can change, right? So imagine I go to a village where maths was never taught or understood, and I taught them maths, right? Now, I think pretty much everyone would agree that village, from that point on, if it was adopted, they would undergo a radical revolution, right? So imagine, just a more obvious example, imagine the wheel, right? So the wheel wasn't universally discovered by humans all at the same time, right? People get confused about stuff like this. The wheel was discovered somewhere, and then slowly but surely it was implemented and probably feared, right? And look at the radical change that led to. You might just say, well, it was just a change in functionality, but that freedom, this automation, this form, the wheel is a basic machine of sorts, right? That it gives us freed up time for other pursuits, pondering, pontificating, and then with maths and stuff, classifying, adding up, measuring, assessing, judging, right? So you think about the radical revolutionary changes that these new modes of thought have introduced, right? So for me to say that humans are bound by some instinctive modus operandi, I think there's some truth in it, and that the influence of these instinctive forces will always be there, right? But as we've shown, they can be harnessed, right? So look at the way that the instinct of fear has been exploited, manipulated, right? As a foremost example, really. So I think it's unscientific to say that we can't change, right? And there's also, I think there's the onus on us to consider change, right? Because for all we know, and again, let's deal in the realm of what is known. For all we know, this could be the first time in our planetary history where nature has been able to consciously choose its course, right? So let's not waste this opportunity, because we don't know if it isn't the last one, at least locally, right? So, again, I'm probably exposing my naivety here, and please do come forward and explain why. But so imagine just a thought experiment here. Imagine everyone on the planet thought, no more fighting. Everyone on the planet, right? So all 8.5 billion of us, right, just said, no more fighting. I'm opposed to violence. Well, we'd have no more fighting, right? Now, I know it's a tough old road to get to that place, because obviously there's people being exploited and manipulated and bullied and coerced and cajoled into fighting, right, to serve some master. So how would it actually happen in the real world right today? It probably couldn't. I accept that, because there'd be people who should be shot in the head if they put their weapons down, right? So I grant that, but nevertheless, it's something to aspire to. So again, let's just think what a retort might be. They might say, but it's human nature to fight. And I would respond and say, well, that's only if we're guided solely by deterministic, mechanistic processes, the sorts of, materialist models that we've subscribed to for a couple of, for some time, right? For so long that it's ingrained in our very thought, language, and speech, right? And also we've been individualized, right? Our tribes have been sort of dissolved. We live in little boxes. Sure, we're contiguous with our neighbours and so on, but we're not large communities now, except for families that have their own boundary lines, which can lead to feuds and so on and so forth. So, that tribal membership that we used to have, and we create our own. So we still tick that even sort of instinctive box, but we know that there's something not quite right. Yeah, okay. We've been trained to believe that we don't care about others and that this is as good as it gets, right? And then we get all these, I can't remember the name of the book actually, but it was by some sort of fairly right-shifted economist who was saying that, people are complaining, but actually these are the best days in human history because we've got higher literacy levels and, higher life expectancy, both of which are dipping now, I should say, in certain parts of Western Europe, right? So take that. But, I would say that we have problems with our soul, right? So we can set aside literacy and life expectancy and stuff, actually, because it's not that matters, right? It's like sort of GDP, used as a measure of the success of a nation. So, in some sense, this is a message to all of those who have said and will say that humans can't change and there's no point pursuing utopia. That you're wrong. It's bullshit, right? I think there's a mixture of reasons why people seek to close down that debate. One is because they know on some level that they've committed themselves to a particular narrative, and it's terrifying. The thought of them being wrong and questioning years of commitment to some sort of faulty script can be, a bit of a bum day, if you discover that and realise that. Right, so people protect and preserve their inner culture, which is completely understandable, and a hell of a lot of it might be perfectly authentic as well. I'm not denying that. So that's one of the reasons, I think, because people have invested so much of their own souls into a particular worldview, so they can't face any other. And the other is because of a lack of imagination and just a belief. When as a child, there's this sense in which you look at the world as a sort of concrete, sort of permanent place, like. I think I've mentioned this elsewhere, but those red pillar boxes, if you grow up in England, and red telephone boxes, you think it felt like they'd been there forever. The Bobby on the beat, he'd been there forever, right? The little shop on the corner, it had been there forever, and it's all so shocking, isn't it, when you go back to your hometown and see the bakery has been replaced or built over with flats or something, and you think, well, that's gone, that sense of eternity lost forever, right? And so people cling on to the status quo because it's a status quo from whence they came, right? And so that's just a scaredy cat way of thinking. There's the fear of discovering you've wasted your life. And, there's this other thing as well. It's like, well, this is working for me. The status quo is working for me. So therefore it must be okay. So there's the selfish thing. And then you point the finger at the people for whom the status quo isn't working and say, well, they're losers, right? It's the sort of capitalist mantra in a way, isn't it? It's about winners and losers, and some win and some lose. Well, I'd say that's just a form of violence, that mentality, right? If there it is, it's a form. That's a form of violence because actually that's not written into the human spirit at all. We're cooperative. And we share and we heal and we help each other. And whenever you see a crisis on TV of violence and things like that, there's just as well, perhaps not quite as many, but there's always those that are on the fringes helping. Right? That's us. Humans have to be trained to kill, and I know there's been some objection to the science behind this, but there's fairly strong evidence to suggest that quite a lot of the weapons, I think in both world wars actually, they've investigated battle scenes and things like this, right? And they found that quite a lot of the guns weren't discharged, suggesting, sort of higher proportions than you'd expect, right? Suggesting that people just didn't want to kill these people that looked like them. Yeah? European, Caucasian, Christian human beings shooting at each other, right? And there you have it. So my point is to those that have said we can't change, stop wasting your time, you're overthinking this, is that you're just wrong, and the science is there now. Perhaps it wasn't at the time, because we were going through the kind of genome revolution, weren't we? The idea was that DNA would explain everything. DNA can explain behaviour, even. Right? And we now know that that's just simply not the case. Right? Evolution doesn't proceed through random blind mutation. Evolution proceeds through intelligent self-correction and adaptation to changing circumstances and conditions and goals. And some of those goals are mental goals. Most of those goals. In fact, if you examine my metaphysics closely, I would assert that they're all mental goals fundamentally. So this is a creative world of which we are a hugely significant part, right? Because we are reflective entities that can look out upon ourselves and think about how we can alter that. I mean, look at some of the creations we've already delivered, right? And so that's an amazing thing, and that should be celebrated. And every single one of us is an absolute miracle. And when I say us, I extend to the whole planetary system. Okay, what we've got here is just an amazing accomplishment, and it needs to be protected and understood. And we've got a long road on both of those fronts. And the more we understand it, the more we respect it. I mean, somehow, some of the animist folks, so North American Indians, they knew this stuff already. Some of these shamanic communities knew this, and we don't know why really, but they did. They knew that they were ensconced within a kind of broad foliation, a sort of natural, integral system that includes us. And then somehow we ended up with this kind of arrogant, very sort of warrior culture, sort of hero culture-based sort of arrogance about our role in the world, not as stewards and gardeners and healers, but as barbaric, consumers and destroyers. I mean, that's a whole other conversation right there, isn't it? But I'm just saying that the science no longer backs up this idea that we're bound to a set of behavioural principles. And this extends everywhere. I mean, we've got physicists, Lee Smolin, talking about this idea of evolutionary physics. So the actual behaviour of the universe itself and the physics that we can describe themselves change over time. Right, so we're seeing this shift in thinking across all disciplines, right? And so that's cool. And so really this is about the fact that I believe that we can change, we are changing, and we're changing for the better. So there's a bright future ahead of us. There might be some bumps along the way, but we'll get that. Cheers, guys. Thanks.